No, the only thing that I can sort of ascertain from this that he's very proud of his anti-insect spray can.
Yes.
Um,
To hell with wasps, I think was their mantra.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
yeah. Uh, please go off. And I wasn't even sure if you guys had Raid over there. It's got because it's one of those things where it's probably got so many goddamn awful chemicals in it and shit that it could only
yeah,
be sold in America.
yeah, yeah. You'd
Oh,
think,
John.
wouldn't you? Yeah.
Hey, everybody out there, and welcome back to another Friday episode of the Audiophiles. It's Andy, it's John, and it's time to dig into some music. And in this case, music offered up by one of you lovely folks out there in the listening audience. This one was offered up by S. Kulzer 9363 on our Cage the Elephant Shake Me Down video. So, the track that John is going to go off and listen to today is by Dan Luke and the Raid, and the song is called Fool. And I sort of had this "oh you fool" moment when I was doing my research for this one, as I realized what we were dealing with, and I'll get into that a bit more on the other side of John's reaction. But John, I'm assuming you've got no sort of inclination of this band, their sound, how long they've been around, or any of that stuff, right?
No, the only thing that I can sort of ascertain from this that he's very proud of his anti-insect spray can.
Yes.
Um,
To hell with wasps, I think was their mantra.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
yeah. Uh, please go off. And I wasn't even sure if you guys had Raid over there. It's got because it's one of those things where it's probably got so many goddamn awful chemicals in it and shit that it could only
yeah,
be sold
yeah,
in America.
yeah, yeah. You'd
Wow,
think,
John.
wouldn't you? Yeah.
So yeah, go off and give this thing a listen, man, and then come back and let me and S. Colzer 9363 and the rest of our audience know what you made of it, buddy.
Will do.
You called me out, said you were my friend. I can't talk right now, and let's just pretend I'm lost and found again and again.
Okay. Immediate start straight out of the gates. It's got a nice sound to it. It's got that sort of familiarish sound. There's a lot of it around in the late 80s and in the noughties as well, and it kind of harks back to me that sort of American lighter sort of garage, not the sort of the Stooges and stuff like that, the proto punk, but the sort of lighter garagey type sound. It's got a touch of like surfer to it and a bit of jangle and yeah. I'm hearing bits of like that underground as well, and all sorts. But yeah, it sounds really nice. Yeah, two guitars, bass, drums. I like the guy in the lead. He sort of dropped down when the guy started singing and just did a very, very careful, which is quite funny. Um, he's got a decent voice. Yeah, it's just something about you called me out, thought you were my friend or something. So immediately things are not happy. See how it goes.
Don't lose me now, it's nearly the end. Wide awake, but I'm sleeping through the days. Walk away, slowly fading as I say, hey,
Wow, we're halfway through. This is a short song. That bit there, I think from his guitar, we'll call it the rhythm. I'm getting a lot of strokes type sound from it, which I guess harkens back again to what influenced the Strokes and all those things I talked about. So yeah, it's really pleasant. So I'm enjoying this. Yeah, decent.
Hey, you play games. Time will tell. I built this house. Watch me tear it down. You know those floors have gone to the ground.
To say I'm not sure about those vocals there. He doesn't need to start doing that. Whip. No, just keep it straight, mate.
Wide awake, but I'm sleeping through the days. Walk away, slowly fading as I say, hey, don't be so cruel. You try to be the ruler, cruelest kind of cruel. Don't be a fool. Judge my every blow till I'm black and blue. Don't be so cruel. You try to be the ruler, the cruelest kind of
That was really, I really enjoyed that actually. It's quite a lightish sort of song. It wasn't anything particularly heavy. It was and fairly sort of simple sounding. Um, yeah, I'd like to see him get into it. I don't know. He was getting quite worked up. Maybe it's about someone that he knows, and um, but yeah, the overall. It's almost like a bit of slacker to it as well, in a way. Um, and that's probably why it's just sort of a bit weird with him getting so worked up because it's really sort of quite a too cool for school kind of song. Um, yeah, interesting. But I really like the overall sound of it. Um, it's interesting. I was thinking that before we saw him that the drumming to me sounded a bit sort of disconnected, and it looks from the just the way it's edited. It may not be the case, but like he's tucked away. Um, there was a bit right at 3/4 mark where it sort of brought it back in, and that sounded like the rest of the time not so much. Um, maybe that's just a visual thing that's playing tricks with my mind. I don't know. Got to find out some more about these guys though. So let's go back and chop it up with Andy.
What did you make of Dan Luke and the Raid in this song Fool?
Yeah, overall, I say you get this sort of sound, this tone that pops up in the late 80s and again in the noughties, and it's kind of based on what I think in my head a sound from the 60s, late 60s. This sort of lighter garage type sound with a touch of surf in it and
Yeah.
almost a dash of slacker as well.
Yep.
I hear from it real influences from lots of bands, but Velvet Underground comes to mind straight away as one of their sort of styles. Um, um, and I'm really quite partial to this sound if it's done well, and that's what I'm getting with this song here. So the song breaks straight out of the gate like a starved whippet. Um, no messing, bang straight in. Two guitars, bass and drums, sounding decent. Really like the tone on that lead guitar. Um, there is something about let's practice in somebody's garage type tone to it, but it's still nice.
Yeah.
Your man starts singing, and his guitar goes to this sort of clipped, chuggy sort of sound. While the lead guitar takes a break, he must be exhausted after his like 4 bars of playing. And I do like how after about a couple of bars into the verse, he very carefully There's one chord. It's just the way he does it's really funny. I'm sure he's not even thinking about it. It just looks like, and he's obviously a lot more accomplished than that because you hear it later on. But it just looked really funny when he did it. Get ready for this. It's just funny. I hear the line something about you called me out, said you were my friend. So he doesn't sound particularly happy with all this. There's obviously this tension, and who's the fool? Would be the narrator. It's probably not. It's probably the subject of the song.
Mm.
I think the singer has a decent voice. Although I will say, and this happens later on, but he gets a bit sort of agitated and impassioned. And I think the strength lies in his sort of almost slacker, too cool for school delivery and the tone. So rather than sort of this fish shaking angst that he potentially gets to, I can imagine him just complaining over his shoulder someone or knocking them up with a rather nice risotto. And I'd stick with that, mate, if I was him. So there's a nice building section through, at the end of the verse, which leads up to the chorus, and I guess they call that a pre-chorus in arty circles. And the guitar starts strumming, increasing in frequency, and it sounds really nice. And then we hit the chorus, and I guess I do hear like a don't be don't be so cruel, and then it flip into cool, and then the titular fool. So he's got his rhyming dictionary out, which is good. And we've got from those few words, I'm getting the tone of it. We also at this point get a couple of snatches of our first glimpses of the drummer, who it seems has been secreted in some secret corner of the studio, usually reserved for underage heirs to the French throne. Um, and because of his like partitioned presentation, my mind, I think, convinces me for a short while that the drumming sounds detached from the bass and as be the rhythm section. I think this is just my mind playing tricks with me because it does get resolved later on in the song. But there you go. That's the power of suggestion. We get a nice little strum section with some accents from the lead after the chorus, and at this point, I'm getting some real Strokes type sounds from the rhythm guitar, which makes sense thinking of all of Strokes' influences. It all harks back along that sort of line.
Yeah.
You're skipping the stone across the water to the same destination, as it were. Um, Now, around the 2 minute mark, the singer then starts to get all sort of breathy and yelpy, and it just didn't fit the overall tone at all. I was wondering what the lyrics were at that point. It just felt odd to me, and there may be a really good reason, but it just didn't work for me. That's one of my few criticisms, actually. We get the pre-chorus and then the chorus again, and this time in the chorus, we get it almost in isolation and with added bounces from the singer as he's keeping. And he must be looking at the drum at this point. And then back coming the drums that resolve and tie up everything really nicely. And my stupid idea of it not being attached is completely blown out of the water. And we get a couple more lines and we're done. So yeah, I did really enjoy this actually. It had a lovely tone to it. It's a very simple sort of song. And it's really about the tone and the feel of it. Obviously, if I'd have caught the lyrics, I probably would have read a bit more. But I've got the idea there's this conflicts and people either not treating him right or not behaving correctly. Probably some sort of betrayal or two-facedness, I'm guessing. But yeah, overall, I like the sound of this. It wasn't anything groundbreaking or amazing, but just really pleasant, and I enjoyed it.
Yeah. So did I. And I'm glad you enjoyed it too. I also failed to mention, but you clearly suggested it, live version over at WFUV there in New York City. We've used a couple of their stuff, their videos in the past for our channel. And yeah, it was a kind of akin to a KEXP, maybe a little less, bells and whistles, but just as good in quality. But yeah, they're a really interesting band. I had a lot of fun researching this one because it was so much like, oh my God, I've been suggested these guys in the past, but didn't remember the name of the band. And then when I did the research, I'm like, oh, it's these guys. So I'll get into that in a little bit as I go over it. But they're a rock band from Bowling Green, Kentucky. The band consists of Daniel Schultz, guitar and lead vocals, Dylan T. Graves, guitar, synthesizer, vocals, J. Anthony Joyner on bass, piano, and vocals, and Kendrick Don Reed Brent on drums, percussions, and vocals. Their music has been described as raucous, clangy, and both retro and futuristic, depending on the track. Although the four members all hail from the same scene in town, they bring diverse influences to Dan Luke and the Raid's sound. Schultz's roots are primarily in foundational rock and punk, things like the Velvet Underground and Jefferson Airplane and the Mamas and the Papas, he says in an interview. And then television, Talking Heads, the Germs, the Dead Boys, and the Brian Jonestown Massacre, all the way up to Granddaddy, Modest Mouse, and the Strokes. So he's covered a lot of bands that have either featured on this channel or that we've talked about. Brent, meanwhile, draws from a lot of old school hip hop and jazz, Schultz continues in this quote, while Anthony is into psychedelia like Ty Segall. And obviously, we all also draw from the influence of the Beatles. The band's frontman, the aforementioned Dan Schultz, grew up in a very musical family in the area. His older brothers, Matt and Brad, are the co-founders of the band Cage the Elephant. So now I understand why it was offered up. And Cage the Elephant, I don't know if you remember this, I doubt you would, but they're also from Bowling Green. So when I first saw that when I'm going through it, I'm like, okay, same city. Maybe they toured, and I'm like, oh my God, it's the little brother. So that's how they've tied into Cage the Elephant. So Schultz, who is more than a decade younger than his two siblings, didn't experience their success in the usual way. I didn't even realize what was happening with them at first because I was just a little kid, he says. Matt is 12 years older than me, and Brad is 14 years older than me. So they were already off doing their thing, and I was just learning about life, he laughs. You know, like figuring out how to do math and shit. The band's only album, their 2019 debut, Out of the Blue, on which this track features, was produced by his older brother, the aforementioned Brad Schultz. When it came time to track Out of the Blue, the band headed to Battle Tapes Recording in Nashville, Tennessee, working throughout the fall of 2018 with studio owner Jeremy Ferguson engineering and Brad Schultz producing. It was a good, honest relationship in the studio, Schultz says, about having his brother behind the boards. We love each other, and so we can say, dude, I don't fucking like that. And there's no tension afterwards. In the lead up to the album's release, the band traveled and toured to promote the album. In 2019, they traveled to Austin for their debut appearance at the annual South by Southwest Festival, and experienced that, by all accounts, was among the highlights of their young career. There was something special about those 5 shows we played, Schultz said. It was just the excitement of being there and living out the pursuit of our dreams. Only a few weeks after the celebratory moment, the band members were back in Bowling Green when Graves was involved, and Graves is the lead guitarist, was involved in a work-related accident at his day job that horrifically took his life. Schultz recalls a phone call from bandmates Joyner and Brent, informing him that it had happened. I was in total shock, disbelief. I went to Kendrick's house, the bass player, the drummer, forgive me, and we just held each other and cried. The question of how to continue on after the sudden loss of a close friend, especially at such a young age, is not an easy one to answer. I think he was like 21 years old or something like that. Today, Schultz is perhaps no closer to figuring it out than he was at the time immediately following Graves' death. But determining how Dan Luke and the Raid would carry on was, at least relatively speaking, a bit easier to resolve. I remember Kendrick looking at me that day at his house and saying, Dylan would be fucking pissed if we didn't keep going, Schultz says, and I agreed with him. So the question wasn't, are we going to continue? It was, how do we continue? A little more than 2 weeks later, the three band members took their first tentative steps in that direction, playing a small, emotionally charged show in their hometown as a tribute to Graves. The hardest show we've ever played and probably ever will, Schultz said at the time. And while he laments the fact that more people won't get to experience Dylan's laughter and his love and his kindness, Schultz also says at the very least, he's happy we recorded something with Dylan, so that we and everyone who listens to our music will have something of his forever. Unfortunately, the band has yet to release another piece of music since, and in 2021, drummer Kendrick Brent announced his amicable departure from the band and enlisted in the Navy. Pop Matters reviewed the album in early 2020, and writer Chris Connaughton had this to say. Out of the Blue is a very listenable album, with its 10 tracks showing influences from across the rock spectrum: 1960s pop, 2000s garage rock, psychedelia, southern rock, all make their presence felt, while Dan's voice, simultaneously a bit nasally and a bit raspy, helped ties it all together. He would go on to add, Schultz has some skill as a songwriter, but I don't think he's quite found his voice yet. The guitars from Schultz and the sadly now deceased Dylan Graves show scattered moments of real inventiveness. The guitar solo on Farah Mantra ends by going into double time version of the melody, and it sounds like Schultz is working hard to pull it off. That was interesting to me, because with a blues or heavy metal virtuoso playing that same solo, that bit would be smooth and cool, but it wouldn't sound nearly as impressive. Brian Q. Newcomb of the Fire Note reviewed the album as well, and said this in his writing. Famous siblings and tragedy aside, Dan Luke and the Raid's debut is a fine collection of fun, innocent rock songs. Out of the Blue is a solid, musically promising debut from a band ready to leave behind playing basement keggers and step onto the national stage. So it would appear, I have no idea what is going to happen with this band or what their status is. There's no Wikipedia page. All of this information I've cobbled together from disparate articles. The band's like now probably pretty dormant website from the looks of it. But this album, like, I went off and listened to a couple other songs, some of the ones that were mentioned in the write-ups, and it all sounds really good. And it does, and promising is probably the best word to describe it. Like, it's not a perfect album. Very rarely are debut albums perfect, but they are really like strong indicators of what might be to come. And as you enjoyed this one little glimpse into what they offered, and I would assume it's safe to say found promise in it as well. So did all the other tracks had that too. So it's really a shame that such a tragic event would occur that would then kind of cause the elongated pause of the band or its early downfall. I'm not really sure which is a better way to categorize. As I mentioned, I couldn't find anything, but it's really sad and really just unfortunate for everybody involved. Mostly, obviously, let's not prioritize anything over the loss of life. Graves passing and his family and loved ones, that's huge. But this band really had something going for them, and with them being, I mean, with Schultz being the younger brother of two guys who already, won 2 Grammys and have like all of this, you call it nepotism, sure, but this guy's clearly got talent and he had all the resources at hand. They had everything they needed. And then this totally turned everything on its head, which is really, really quite unfortunate. So, let me jump into these lyrics. You called me out, said you were my friend. I can't talk right now unless it's pretend. I'm lost and found again and again. Don't lose me now. It's nearly the end. Wide awake, but I'm sleeping through the days. Walk away, slowly fading as I say, hey, don't be so cruel. You try to be the ruler of the cruelest. Kind of cool. Don't be a fool. Judge my every move till I'm black and blue. I'm raising love, so don't be raising hell. You play your games, time will tell. I built this house. Watch me tear it down. You know those floors like I know the ground. Wide awake, but I'm sleeping through the days. Walk away, slowly fading as I say, hey, don't be so cruel. You try to be the ruler of the cruelest. Kind of cool. Don't be a fool. Judge my every move till I'm black and blue. Don't be so cruel. You try to be the ruler of the cruelest. Kind of cool. So there you go. Those are the lyrics.
Hmm.
So,
Interesting.
yeah, interesting stuff. I'd love to see these guys. I know I'm late to the game here, obviously, on listening to this and finding out a bit more about them. I'd already been like, oh, you love Cage the Elephant, you should check out their younger brother stuff. And I was like, oh, okay, cool. But that's really all I had. So this was,
Hmm.
kind of serendipitous that we got offered up this song. So thank you, S. Colzer or Skulzer 9363. Really great shout. Got me off the schneid and able to give this thing a listen, and John the same. Yeah, really good stuff. I'd love to see them kind of bounce back at some point and kind of put something back together, because this had a lot of promise to it, I thought. Maybe down the line, I'll grab another one of these tracks I was really fond of, and we can bring it back onto the channel for a short little episode dedicated to another one of their tracks, since there's really not much about the band and we've covered most of it right now. But John, thank you for giving this thing a listen and a
No, my
watch.
pleasure.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's a
live
good shout.
performance. Yeah, and thank you again, as John just alluded to, is a great shout. So S. Colzer, once again, man, good stuff. Thank you so much for offering this up. I say man, woman, I don't know. There was no gender attributed to the name. But thank you so much for offering it up to us. We had a great time listening to it. I especially had a fun time kind of unearthing all this stuff that I should have dived into God knows when, back when I heard about these guys. So thanks so much. And hopefully, also, oh, please, while we have your attention, like, share, and subscribe if you'd be so inclined. And if you are sitting on some gems and some potential songs that you'd like us to listen to, drop them down in the comments field below on this episode or any of our other episodes, and we will add it to our ever-growing list of song suggestions and devote a Friday episode to it in the future. Probably a little bit more distant than near, but that only speaks to how large that ever-growing list has become. So hopefully John and I will catch all y'all on the next episode of the Audiophiles. We'll see you later, guys.